Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm the vice chair for the CAC. Thank you for joining us. Our chair, Evan Zelig, is having some technical difficulties. His internet, or he keeps losing power, so he will be participating in the meeting, but I'll kind of be helping him facilitate. So first off, I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here with us. If anyone would like Spanish translation, please raise your hand. Si hay alguien que necesite traducción en español, por favor, suba la mano. From the agenda, as you can see, public comment at community advisory council meetings. Members of the public are free to address the CAC. The public comments should fall under the subject matter jurisdiction of the CAC and are time limited and apply only to action items. Oral public comment on agenda action items is available during CAC meetings. The public is also invited to communicate with Iolero staff and CAC members through email. Members of the public who would like to make statements that may exceed the time limits for public comment, suggest topics to be placed on future agendas, or suggest questions to be raised and discussed by CAC members or staff may send an email addressing these matters to law.enforcement.auditor@sonoma-county.org. As CAC members, we can't deliberate or take action on items that are not on the agenda and generally may only listen. Should CAC members wish to deliberate on any issue raised during public comment, that issue may be placed on a future agenda for discussion and possible action. Any material related to on this agenda can be found at the Iolero office or at the above email address. You can send an email to the email address that I mentioned, which is law.enforcement.auditor@sonoma-county.org. We also adopted a design team alliance. Everyone is encouraged to engage in respectful, non-disruptive communication that supports freedom of speech and values diversity of opinion. Our design team alliance is a list of norms which describe the way the CAC wants to show up and be in community while modeling collaborative behavior. We request that CAC members, staff, and the public follow the CAC's agreed upon design team alliance, which is to be tough on topic, not on people, respect others' perspective, respect time, practice active listening, be open-minded, speak to others as you would like to be spoken to, honor freedom of speech, and call each other in. For tonight's meeting, we also want to address public comment and ensure we have all a shared understanding. Public comment on items on the agenda and items not on the agenda, but within the subject matter jurisdiction of Iolero and CAC. When we get to that point, please state your name and who you represent if that's applicable, and comments will be limited to 3 minutes unless we're running out of time. And we will let everyone know how much time everyone has. And that'll also be based on the comments and other factors. Okay, now we'll move forward. Sorry, that was a lot. Now we can move forward onto formal business items for our meeting. So we will take roll. Councilmember Bailey will be joining us after 6:30. Councilmember Barrera.
Present.
Councilmember David Hernandez. I don't think is present at this time. Councilmember Jose Landaverde.
Present.
Councilmember Alma Roman Diaz.
Present.
Thank you. I'm your vice chair and Chair Zelig.
I am present, sort of, but I'm present.
Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and move to approve the minutes from our last meeting. So if we could please have one of the council members make a motion to approve the minutes if no changes are needed or no any changes.
Evan Zelig is abstaining as I was not present for the last meeting.
Thank you. I'll move to approve.
I second. Dora. Seconds.
Okay. And if everyone's in favor, please raise your hand so that Melanie can capture the vote. All council members. Alma?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, regarding the annual report, it was presented to the Board of Supervisors. It was very well received, and if anyone needs a copy mailed to them, please reach out to the Iolero office and we will mail one to you. They are available in English and in Spanish. Again, regarding Spanish translation, if you need translation, please raise your hand. Si hay alguien que necesita traducción en español, por favor, suba la mano. Okay. Regarding Measure P.
Lorena,
Arlene,
can I,
yeah.
can I butt in just for 1 second since you just mentioned translation? I read on the agenda that starting January, translations would have to be requested ahead of time. And
Okay.
that was on the agenda, so I was just making sure it was addressed.
Okay, thank you for noting that. Okay, Carlene, did you have any updates regarding Measure P and what the?
No, I think that the Measure P item was added when Adriana sent out a call for agenda items. We got a couple responses from CAC members. One person responded and said that he or she wanted to debrief with the rest of the group about Measure P. So that's why that was placed on the agenda. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Loraz, who's going to be late tonight. It was Loraz. And I think Jose Landaverde also submitted something that he was interested in debriefing about. Was that right, Jose?
Yeah, but I went ahead and retracted it from.
Oh, okay. Is this something that we're going to address at a future meeting?
Correct.
Okay. So maybe we'll table that for next time Loraz is here, unless anybody else wants to make any comments or have any debriefing or discussion about it.
Carlene, this is Evan Zelig. As far as the Measure P, is it possible to let us know the timing as far as when things are taking place regarding the appointments of any new attorneys or the hiring of any new attorneys or anything involved with the CAC? Are there any deadlines that we need to know as far as the board taking action?
No deadlines, Evan. I sent out an update via the newsletter shortly before Measure P passed, when it was poised to pass. And the first step that we're going to be taking as a department is making sure that we get the necessary funding that we need to move forward with some of the new duties and authority that we're going to have via Measure P. So we are on calendar. I think it's for December 15th for the Board of Supervisors to have our funding approved. The 2 attorneys that were approved, to be clear, that was not something that resulted because of Measure P. That was something that was approved at the September budget hearings. And those recruitments are already in place. So the application period closes December 9th, and I will be going through the rest of the recruitment county process after that, and interviews will be slated for January. The last time I hired someone, Adriana was hired as our programs manager in January, and we were not able to get her into the office until May 19th due to the lengthy post-background check, some of the county processes we have to go to, and also delays because of the shelter in place. So I'm hoping we can get these 2 new attorneys into the office before that, and then we'll function incrementally at absorbing some of the new duties that we have via Measure.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go ahead and have Abby Tardy give a debrief on the work of the de-escalation ad hoc committee, and then we'll follow up with Zach Harkins for the compliance ad hoc.
All right, so since the last CAC meeting, the De-Escalation Committee has begun summarizing the de-escalation techniques and training descriptions of all 58 California Sheriff's Department's policy and procedure manuals. These descriptions are being compared and contrasted with the descriptions provided by Post as to what de-escalation training for officers should consist of. An analysis of policies that follow the Lexipol model compared to those that do not is also being conducted as a way of identifying the strengths and weaknesses within each model. This research will be presented at the January 2021 CAC meeting.
Thank you, Abby. And then Zach, are you available to provide the other update?
I actually will be giving up the update.
Oh, thank you, Carmen.
So the Compliance Ad Hoc Committee has done research on crowd control measures on all 58 counties, California Sheriff's Department. There are 3 categories in which the police policies can fall under, such as independent policy, making in which a jurisdiction authored in its own policy manual and has no current relationship with Lexipol. Hybrid policy, making which consists of a jurisdiction subscribed to the Lexipol service but continue to publish its own policy manual without a Lexipol copyright stamp, and those agencies adopt the Lexipol policy manual.
Carmen, excuse me. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you get a little closer to your?
Do I start over?
Just having a hard time hearing you.
According to David Livy, Deputy Sheriff at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department has its own divisions that transcribes and updates their department's standards, policies, and operation procedures, and education on training mandates. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department has its legal counsel to review all of the department's policies. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department is dedicated to ensuring the safety of all the residents and individuals who want their voices heard and wish to exercise the right to protest peacefully. Legally acceptable restrictions on the right to protest include prohibiting the obstruction of roads, sidewalks, and building entrances and exits. Furthermore, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department posts a poster on all their social media platforms in regards to the First Amendment and the right to peacefully protest. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department sworn personnel are trained to use chemical agents such as OC in order to minimize the injury to potentially violent suspects and others to avoid property without resorting to deadly force. Compared to the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, they do not use rubber bullets. They do have them under kinetic impact projectiles in which they can be launched only if it gets righteous. Now, our questions remain. How can you describe when a decision is made to switch from pepper spray, tear gas, to kinetic projectile? And with recent protest images and videos surface of people being struck in the head and chest with these kinetic projectiles, which are metal objects covered in rubber, how would you go about making sure these instances do not occur?
So Lorena, if I could just follow up on what Carmen was summarizing, I think that what Carmen was doing, she and the other interns were working with the ad hoc committee to compare and contrast departments that use Lexipol, which is a policy consultant agency that we're going to be talking about more or less tonight. And they were comparing the agencies that use Lexipol to agencies that don't use Lexipol. And so that's the summary that she was giving us. And what she read at the end there was some of the questions that we were hoping to open up the discussion with tonight with our panelists that we have here at our meeting tonight. Is that right, Carmen? Did I cover that okay?
Yes, you did. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. You did well. I just wanted to follow up and give kind of some background on that. So Lorena?
Thank you. Thank you, Carlene. Thank you, Carmen. So now we're going to move forward. I'm going to read the bios for our panelists, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the agenda. So tonight we have Spencer Fomby, Brandon Cutting, Napoleon Reyes, and Timothy Hughes. And let me just pull up their bios. So Spencer Fomby is a 20-year veteran of the Berkeley Police Department. He has 16 years of SWAT experience and is a certified use of force instructor. He is also a tactical instructor for the National Tactical Officers Association. He is assigned to a National Institute of Justice Special Technical Committee on Crowd Control Equipment. Brandon Cutting, Lieutenant Cutting, with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, has been with the Sheriff's Office since 2005, serving in a variety of roles from patrol to investigations. He currently manages a professional standards unit, which includes internal affairs training, policy review, use of force review, and is the Sheriff's Office liaison for the Independent Office of Law Enforcement Review and Outreach. Dr. Napoleon Reyes is a chair of Sonoma State University's Criminology and Criminal Justice Studies Department, where he teaches police, courts, and community relations. Dr. Reyes holds a doctorate in criminal justice from Sam Houston State University, a law degree from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and a bachelorette of psychology from the University of Santo Tomas. He currently collaborates with various governmental and non-governmental organizations in addressing police use of force issues and state-sponsored extrajudicial killings. Timothy Hughes is an instructor at the Public Safety Training Center in Sonoma County, where he teaches patrol response and tactical team response to law enforcement recruits. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. And I believe we can go ahead and proceed and have Spencer Fomby start us off with a discussion on tonight's topic.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. This is, and I appreciate the invitation back. The first time I spoke to you was regarding de-escalation a while back, and it's good to hear that you're following up on that. I'm actually interested to see the results of your study. I'm not sure if you wanted to start with questions or if you wanted me to talk generally about this topic.
But I know, why don't you start, let Lieutenant Fomby tell us a little bit about his agency and start with the questions that Carmen started us off with.
Perfect. Carmen, can you go ahead and read those questions again and try to speak really loud into your microphone, please?
Describe when a decision is made to switch from pepper spray to tear gas to kinetic projectiles.
I think, I'll just start with the understanding of crowd control, crowd management, public order, whatever terminology you use, is a very complicated topic. In law enforcement, I'm a tactical officer, a tactical instructor, and I've been on SWAT and been a SWAT team leader and now a SWAT commander for a long time. And when I present about crowd control, I often tell people that it's probably the most complicated and difficult discipline to learn and to manage effectively. So a lot of the things there's a lot of misunderstanding about different aspects of use of force. So when you talk about the application of pepper spray versus chemical agents like CS, tear gas, and then the application of kinetic energy weapons, the thresholds are very different. The application, you have to put everything in context. So for instance, if we're standing on a skirmish line, there's a line of officers and a person approached the line and assaulted an officer, the officers maybe respond by using OC in that case, but they wouldn't necessarily use tear gas because of that. They also may respond by using a kinetic energy weapon, but it really just depends on what's happening at the moment. The decision to use tear gas is normally very specific, and a lot of things have to be in play. There normally has to be some acts of violence that have already occurred. The assembly or the event is determined as no longer lawful. So an unlawful assembly, normally there's some dispersal order that's been given, a direction of travel, some opportunity for the people who are uninvolved or who don't want to have force applied against them to leave the area, and then some decision normally from the incident commander or somebody in charge to then deploy tear gas. So if any of those factors don't happen, or any of those steps are missed, then sometimes that becomes an issue. One thing I will address before I stop on this topic is the term rubber bullets. It's a pet peeve of mine. So in domestic law enforcement, I don't know of any police agency or police organization that uses rubber bullets. So I know it's a term like cotton swabs, Q-tips. People just use the term, but it's incorrect. So in the United States, what rubber bullet is, what you described, technically a metal shaped object, shaped like a bullet, coated in rubber, and shot from a firearm that is used as a less lethal weapon, but not in the United States. You may see that used in other countries, and they can be deadly and cause permanent injury. In the United States, there's several different terms, whether less lethal weapons, kinetic energy weapons. Those projectiles are normally beanbag rounds from a shotgun, foam baton rounds, which I describe as like a hard Nerf ball, plastic, frangible, or basically a device that breaks when it hits something solid. Those are the objects that you would typically see, or pepper balls. Those are the objects you would see that police officers in the United States use. And so I tried as much as possible to avoid the term rubber bullets.
Lieutenant Fomby, the items you just described, do all agencies use a different assortment of those items that you described, and who makes that determination? And then maybe we could get follow-up from the other panelists about their own agencies and who makes that determination, and whether that's reflected in your policies.
Sure. One of the issues we have in domestic law enforcement in the United States is there's not a lot of national standards, and there's not a lot of consistency from agency to agency. And so even in my area in the East Bay, from Berkeley to Oakland, we have completely different equipment. And that really is determined by the agency. And I'm a person who has been responsible for bringing a lot of the equipment that we have, from our armored vehicle to our less lethal weapons. I've been responsible for bringing a lot of that equipment to my agency. So it really comes down to expertise of the people who are making the decision, recommendations to, in my case, the police chief and city council, and then that decision to purchase certain equipment. So from one agency to the next. So for us, we have 40mm launchers that shoot a foam baton round, that hard Nerf ball. And we also have a less lethal launcher called an FN 303 that shoots that plastic frangible projectile.
Can Lieutenant Cutting tell us how that differs or is similar to what the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office does?
I would completely agree with everything Spencer said from the start to the finish on it. We also do not have rubber bullets. We use the kinetic foam tip. We don't use the shotgun rounds, the beanbag rounds. The reason and the rationale into why we use what we use is more on effectiveness and the potential injury of the round. I mean, a low lethal or less than lethal round is supposed to be just that. So we choose the weapons that we use to be the most effective and still fall well within the category of low lethal. In other words, causing the least injury possible.
Lieutenant Cutting, I'm really interested, and I want the CAC to jump in and ask questions too, but how do you determine which items you said cause the least amount of injury, I think you said, is one of your considerations? Where does that information come from?
Sure, it comes from tried, tested. We obviously, manufacturers have recommendations, and we will, you can get sampling of equipment as it comes out. There's new technology coming out on a regular basis. Some of it is fantastic, but very unaffordable, depending on the agency you work for. An agency our size, we're limited and what we can afford. So we use what we have seen to be effective locally here. I can talk about like the beanbag round for an example. It comes out of a shotgun. the effectiveness and the accuracy of that over a distance becomes less and less effective and less accurate, and the higher risk of injuring somebody other than the intended person. There's a lot of, pretty much anything that we use, you can research and get studies on. Obviously, the representatives of those companies will provide you a lot of literature. Most of them will come and provide demos for you prior to making a purchase. While our agency isn't super large, so we don't get a lot of companies that want to, come from the East Coast to the West Coast to show us something. There's a lot of local companies that represent a lot of those tools that we can get access to.
Hey, Lorena and CAC, does anybody have any follow-up questions about that?
So we have some questions that we kind of brought up between ourselves, and one of them is how do law enforcement agencies handle protests and crowd control, and are there policies that address protests and crowd control for the different agencies that are being represented here today? So this is open to all panelists to address.
I can speak to it first if it's okay.
Yeah.
So yes, there's several policies that address protests or assemblies, so to speak. We have a policy which is on our website. It's our policy number 432, and it's our First Amendment assembly policy. And I believe it was read from another agency just a little bit ago, a fairly similar policy. We do subscribe to Lexipol. So the verbiage in our policy is similar to other agencies. There's modifications obviously for our local site, but our policy is pretty open to the sheriff's office, and I'll just read the policy preface, so to speak. Sonoma County Sheriff's Office respects the rights of people to peacefully assemble. It is the policy of this office not to unreasonably interfere with, harass, intimidate, or discriminate against persons engaged in the lawful exercise of their rights, while also preserving the peace, protecting life, and preventing the destruction of property. That's the premise of the entire policy. And as you go through it, it supports that all the way through. There's other policies that govern if that assembly were to be found to be non-peaceful, riotous, or violent in other ways. That would go to our policy 303, which is our control devices and techniques. And then as well, our use of force policy, which is our policy 300. All those are available on our website.
So what would determine that something turns into like non-violent? I guess a follow-up question to that would be regarding protesters and what they can do to stay safe and avoid being arrested, but also how does law enforcement determine when it's the appropriate time to make arrests, or what kind of actions do they wait for to make those decisions?
So for us, a assembly is peaceful as long as it's peaceful. If that assembly turns on, so one thing that we always have to keep in mind is there may be a very peaceful group that created an event. Happens all the time where there will be a protest group. And again, let me also differentiate. There's a very big difference between a spontaneous protest or a group that gathers quickly and creates an event in and of itself. There's also a planned protest. So there's two different reactions. Both of those groups are more than welcome to have their assembly and be completely uninvolved with law enforcement altogether. Most of the assemblies that I've been involved in this for quite some time in Sonoma County. Like Spencer, I'm the SWAT commander for Sonoma County. I'll take a SWAT call any day over a crowd control issue because of all of the details. And kind of what I say about that is there's so many personalities at stake. You have the peaceful group who is there for the right reason, to be heard, to be seen in many cases, and to be able to get their voice out there and whatever that is they're talking about. What we always have to take into consideration, and the groups that do this usually do as well, is there's going to be some people that maybe don't have the same agenda as those people. Those are the concerns for us. It's not the people that are out there just trying to get their voice heard. We appreciate and respect that more than most people do. Where the problem comes in when the other people have an alternative motive in that gathering. Sometimes you'll have people that don't believe in the peaceful protest, and so their plan is at some point to elevate it to something else. We try to figure out who those people are. It would be our goal in almost every protest to have a representative of that group notify us what their plan is. If they tell us we're gonna meet here and walk to here, we'll do everything we can to facilitate that, as long as those people internally remain peaceful. And if those internal people remain peaceful, there will be no law enforcement involvement. We don't have any reason to stop that. If those internal people become resistant, or where they start to injure people or start damaging property, then there's evaluations that have to be made. Is it safe to arrest just those people? Is it safe to just stop that process, whatever they're doing? It may be a building protection issue where we just defend the building so no more damage occurs. It all depends, and there's no way to set a line in the sand, because those circumstances aren't dictated by law enforcement. Those circumstances are dictated by the people who are intending to disrupt that protest, which in many cases, as we all know, are not the protesters themselves, but some internal components that some of the people have. And I don't know if that exactly addresses it, but we don't really have a line in the sand to say at this point it would turn to a dispersal order and then we'd elevate it from there. That is not exactly how it works. There are so many personalities at work in these situations. It's very fluid. Carlene, did you have a question?
I did have a question. Did I hear you say that you're contacted sometimes or by community members who want to protest and tell you we're going to walk from point A to point B and request sheriff's office assistance in clearing the way and helping to facilitate a safe protest?
Most of the time, and speaking for the sheriff's office in the county, a lot of the protests that we have in the county, we are well aware of, well in advance of them. We do receive calls. There are a multitude of types of protests. There are the professional protesters. There are groups out there that professionally protest. Those professional protesters generally will contact us in advance, tell us their location of their protest, their intended purpose. They will establish rules with us. We'll establish rules back with them, and there's a dialogue. Oftentimes we'll have a point of contact. You get a phone number, you get a name of somebody that you can call within that organization in case things start to go bad. You can reach out to them. They can reach out to you. Just like we don't want these protests to go bad, the protesters don't. The true people that are there to be heard don't want problems. They want to be heard. So if people show up, they will contact us and let us know, or they're trying to push people out. You can visibly see it in protests normally when those who don't want that peaceful part to stay there, you'll see the group force those people to the edge or outside of that group, and the group start to move away from them. Most of the time, and again, it just depends on it. A lot of it has to do with the time of the event, the organization or the group. But yes, it is not unlikely at all that an organization would contact us and let us know all about what they're doing, because again, they're trying to be heard and they want that to be heard and be peaceful. Having us involved in that, it might elevate it to a point that the media might care about it more, but it doesn't elevate their opinion or their voices beyond that. And it really becomes our story then, not theirs. And I don't think that's the intended purpose of any of these protests.
I wonder, just to follow up on what you're saying, Brandon, Professor Reyes, I wonder from your perspective as an academic and attorney who teaches about police and community relations, how you would follow up on this idea of protecting protesters by having them reach out to law enforcement first, before they peaceably assemble. Can you follow up on that?
Thanks, Carlene. Thanks everyone for inviting me to this panel. I like what Lieutenant Cutting mentioned, that recognizing protests as a form of community dialogue, because essentially that's what it is. Giving community members a venue, an opportunity to express their message, as part of the exercise of their First Amendment rights. It always helps if there's an arrangement, a negotiated agreement between law enforcement and the protesters before the actual protest, because it sets the expectations, leveling of expectations. It makes management of the crowd during the actual protest more manageable. What presents issues is when you have spontaneous protests where you have many unknown variables. And Lieutenant Cutting and Deputy Hughes would probably have more information on the difficulty of dealing with situations where you have a lot of unknowns. Okay, so you have to be ready for a lot of those unknowns. But for the most part, if you have participants in protests and law enforcement having an open line of communication, it prevents any untoward incidents, and it makes the ability to express the message, because the focus must always be about the message, the ability to express the message in a safe manner. So I like what I heard, that they view the protest as a dialogue.
Thank you. Lorena?
I was just going to ask if any of the other guest speakers had anything to add regarding policies on protests, or any comments about protesters in general, or how to avoid being arrested.
I'll jump in here, and I agree with everything that was said. I'm actually shocked sometimes when I hear of agencies around the country that don't actually have a policy for First Amendment assemblies. If we are also a Lexipol agency and we have a similar policy, you can have different restrictions based on the politics of your location. In Berkeley, we have some interesting policies that are a lot more restrictive than other places. But those best practices and those policies, those are living, breathing documents, and they are subject to change based on a lot of different factors. As far as the crowd itself, I have dealt with everything from, on one extreme, Code Pink. These ladies are protesting outside of a Marine recruiting center in downtown Berkeley, and there's literally no threat. It's just there is nothing about their protest that would make me think that there would be violence. And so we go there and we facilitate, and we maybe have a couple of officers on bikes who monitor, and we have kids who leave from Berkeley High, and it's a kind of a sanctioned protest, and they're going to do a walkout, and we block traffic and we let them take the streets, and they march around town, and same thing. And on the other extreme, May 29th of this year, George Floyd protest in downtown Oakland was the most violent extreme protest riot that I have ever been in my career, where as soon as we got on the ground, literally people are trying to kill us. And it's just bricks and bottles and explosives. And the first time in my career that we had people throwing Molotov cocktails at us, and we had 4 Molotov cocktails that hit our line, and officers' pants and boots catching on fire. And a couple blocks from us, this federal security officer was murdered. That was right down the street from us, and we heard it over the radio. So that's how extreme it can be. And over the course of the next several days, in my experience in the in the East Bay, there were multiple times where people were shooting at police officers. My team, we actually went from crowd control into SWAT mode because there was a drive-by shooting at Oakland Police Department and a car chase, and the suspects went into an apartment building, and then we transitioned into SWAT mode and we searched the building and we arrested the 3 suspects. But we were at a protest, so I think people need to keep in mind that depending on the temperature and what the protest is about and how mad people are, how enraged they are, and who the target, if we are law enforcement, we are the target of the protest, it can become very violent very quickly.
Lieutenant Fondy, I have a question, Lorena. Is there a way to differentiate when that kind of scene starts to unravel? Is there a way to differentiate between protesters who are being violent and protesters who are not being violent or reacting themselves and trying to protect themselves from violence? And what, for you and the other panelists, including Deputy Hughes, what kind of policies or training is in place to make those distinctions, if any?
Sure. When I talk to officers about this subject, I call it taking the temperature of the crowd, right? So you get on the ground and you look at the composition, and I don't mean racial composition. I mean, is it a bunch of high school students? Are there people in the crowd who have obvious weapons? Are there a bunch of older people up front? How diverse is this crowd and how mad are they? Right. So I'm looking at all of those factors, and I'm looking for people in the crowd who are, hiding, ducking down, hiding weapons, doing things that make me think that they are intent on damaging property or attacking officers or other people. And the issue is, at a certain point, you can have a person who is a pacifist, who would never in a million years throw anything at a police officer. They're not there for violence. And they're standing right next to a person who only came there to attack cops. And they're standing right next to each other. And they're technically, on the same side in the same crowd, but they have completely different interests. And normally when the violence starts, what we see is, sometimes I agree that if it's a smaller group, they can get pushed out of the crowd, but sometimes they take it over. They literally take over that and they turn it into a riot. And the people who are there and they're not there for violence sometimes become shields. They literally are kind of standing in front of the people who are throwing stuff at the police. And then it becomes very complicated for us because we want to deal with only the people who are committing acts of violence. And there's been times I've been at events where everybody moved and there's 550 people with weapons and they face off with the police and they want to battle. That's actually easier to manage. When there's a bunch of people who are, they're mad, but they really don't want to attack police, but they're in the way, it becomes problematic.
Is there anything that any of you would recommend for protesters who are nonviolent, who find themselves in the middle of a scene like that?
Leave, move out of the way.
I agree, leave. If you hear somebody talking about violence, get away from them. That is not the place you want to be.
Hi, I don't know if you guys can hear me. This is Evan Zelig. I have a question. If Lorena, if this is a good time.
Yeah, just before you say it though, and before I forget, I wanted to just ask if one of our speakers could explain what it exactly means when you say transition into SWAT mode. I think we have maybe a general idea, but if you could just elaborate a little bit more, that would be helpful. And then Evan, what is your question?
If they want to address that first, I can wait.
Yeah, I'll just address that because I made the comment. I don't want people to misconstrue things. So when we may be members of a SWAT team, but we're at a protest, we're facilitating it and we are reacting to violence. When I was talking about that incident in downtown Oakland, our responsibility at a protest is not to go after an active shooter normally. We're there and we react to things that normally occur in protests. But in that event where there was a drive-by shooting of a police station, and then there was a car chase, and then next thing you know, now we've transitioned from standing out there with a baton to now we're going into the mode of, okay, we need to go find these people that are armed with firearms and are shooting at the cops, right? So that's where, I mean, we're transitioning into SWAT mode. We're not doing crowd control. Now we're doing this we're in this other role.
And Lieutenant Cutting, do you have anything to add? I know that we had a lot of questions related to recent incidents, and we don't have to go into those specifically, but is there something that the Sonoma County Sheriff follows that would have, I guess, tell deputies to transition into like whatever sort of protection they're doing first into a SWAT mode kind of role, I guess?
Yeah, I know exactly what Spencer's talking about. However, and I don't know if Berkeley has the same system, but in Sonoma County, we have a tactical team and a SWAT team. They are differentiated and not together. Our tactical team is our other agencies may call a mobile field force. It is the crowd control group of the sheriff's office. So when we have a planned event and our tactical team is on scene, they are not SWAT team members. They are not SWAT operators. Their job is to handle everything at the lowest level, at the safest, most peaceful way through movement. And other than that, there's not a lot to say about how the tactical. That's that operation that's very fluid and is very dependent on the crowd. SWAT is different, and while we have an element of SWAT that's available for every event, because we have so many unknowns, we don't expect the worst, but if we don't plan for it, that's when everything goes bad. If there were to be an event like what Spencer was talking about, our SWAT team would handle that independently of our TAC team. Our TAC team would stay on the line and deal with whatever the problem was. If there was a deadly force from the crowd, if there were a shooting in the crowd, for example, our TAC team would continue to deal with the crowd and try to make a safe adjustment for what was going on. But our SWAT team would most likely be called to that scene to deal with that differently. They're two totally different problems, and we've been blessed in Sonoma County that we have not encountered those two problems at the same time. Unlike I know in Oakland it's happened several times. In San Francisco it's happened time and time again. But here we've been blessed to be pretty peaceful with our protests. And again, I'm not going to talk about the most recent events, but those weren't to the level of lethal force or of SWAT's involvement.
Okay, thank you. Evan, do you want to proceed with your question?
Yeah, to the panelists, when you're discussing, that people should leave if peaceful protesters are in a situation that things start to go the other way, they should immediately leave. What we've found in recent protests is that when, number one, individuals were not able to hear any audible disbursement messages, and by the time that they did turn around to leave, we found that they were kettled. The large groups of people were essentially kettled, where when they turned around to go one direction, they were unable to go there. They were forced another direction to be met only by a large group of police officers. Ultimately, this resulted in the mass arrest of people for curfew violations. Most, if not almost all of those individuals were arrested and then never charged by the district attorney's office. So my question is, what can be done at the law enforcement level to avoid these mass arrests of individuals who are there for peaceful protesting, who are being peaceful, and who happen to be around the area where others may be causing problems? What can you do as far as the policies with your department to assure that there are not these mass arrests of innocent people?
I guess since I'm not involved, I'll speak to this. There's several issues here, and I've actually been retained as an expert witness in a case that was related to mass detention and mass arrest. So I'm familiar with the issue. I would just say that normally, regardless of the type of equipment that the officers are using or deputies are using, there's a way to verify whether people hear the dispersal order. And most agencies will have a process where they verify that it is audible. And so we know that there will be people that say, we didn't hear the dispersal order. It was unclear to me that you wanted us to leave. The real violations come in, again, if there's a declaration of an unlawful assembly, there's a dispersal order given, and either people don't know that they need to leave, or they don't have adequate time to comply, and they don't have a clear direction of travel. Those become the issues. If there was an audible dispersal order, if there was time to comply, and people are just kind of like, for us, we joke in law enforcement circles where, if one of my partners has to give the dispersal order, this is Lieutenant Fomby from the Berkeley Police Department, and the crowd will say, F you. And we're like, okay, they hear me, right? And it's just kind of a thing, like we know that they hear us and they're just not going to comply. And we know if we give them a certain amount of time, some people will trickle away, but it is normal that a mass of the crowd will stay and just not comply with the dispersal order. And then at a certain point, we can't give dispersal orders for hours and hours. That actually becomes a different problem. You either not enough time or way too much time. If we're giving dispersal orders for hours and then we're not taking action, that's not very effective either. So once a reasonable amount of time has been given and it appears that people aren't going to comply, then it's reasonable to me that the law enforcement officer is going to take some action. The issue about the district attorneys not charging, that is normal. That's a separate issue to us. And I mean, I would essentially say, I know that our district attorney is not going to charge those cases. So if I let that dictate my decisions, my tactical decisions, or my decision to enforce the law, then there's really no need for us to be there. I mean, we can't enforce the dispersal order. So that's really a separate issue. A lot of that is political. And we know that it's an issue all across the country that the district attorneys don't charge. Then the protest group, especially if they're very organized, they file complaints. Some of them file lawsuits. That's just a normal pattern. And it's something that we're aware of in law enforcement.
But ultimately, and this is Evan Zelligan, and thank you for those comments and answers. I guess the issue, and keep in mind, the district attorney not charging in these cases was absolutely proper. The curfew violation on which these arrests were based had some real legal issues of its own. But I guess the main thing is, when you make a decision to arrest a mass group of people, or rather, when you are letting people disperse, why can they not leave when they are trying to leave? Why is there then more law enforcement the direction that they are leaving, telling them, sorry, you can't come this way either, and making the arrest? And really, that's the issue that we had, was a lot of people who attempted to leave when being given orders to disperse were then arrested when their egress was blocked by more law enforcement. And I guess, what can we do, and how can your policies be modified so that we have people able to leave when they are in fact trying to do so?
I can address that. Obviously, you're speaking of specifics, which I'm not going to talk about. Those are being addressed. Sure. There is an investigation underway into that. We have a dispersal order. It's in our policy. It's 432.6, unlawful assembly dispersal order. It directs how it's done. It identifies the reasonable expectation that some people may not hear it. So we do it from different locations. We do it in different languages. We do it at different volumes. We try to ensure that everybody has time to respond to those dispersal orders once they're made. At what point that those orders are given is different in every scenario and every circumstance. What laws the people may or may not be violating at the time that order is given is different in every circumstance. So I'm speaking to the policy that you're asking about. It is in our policy, and it's in our policy very clearly that we do provide ample opportunity for people to leave. It is not our goal to end a peaceful assembly. It's throughout our policy and stop peaceful assemblies. We allow them to go. you kind of have to read through it again to see the announcements that we are making, and the end result is usually compliance, especially among peaceful people.
Thank you.
I think Jose Landaverde wants to follow up, Lorena.
Yeah, and then we'll move on to Councilmember Roman Diaz. So go ahead, Jose.
First of all, thank you for being in this, for all the panelists for joining us tonight. These are very gray areas and topics, you know, of who heard what and who did what. My question is actually more to Deputy Hughes. Because you're in the training aspects for the, you know, for the new trainees, the cadets, or whatever it is that the people that you're training. Do these crowd control issues, are they trained? Are they in theory, like what happens when a group all of a sudden blocks the freeway? You know, what is exactly is said to them?
Well, from an academy perspective, what we do is we discuss all facets of crowd control, whether it's a parade or whether it's a protest or whether it's labor dispute or sporting event. There's all types. We do go into crowd dynamics and what some of the constitutional rights people have. Our country's founded on protest and the ability to do so, which was what was one of our pillars of our government. We do go into what constitutes an unlawful assembly, and it's very bland. Just from an academy recruit's perspective, he's not going to be giving he's not going to be determining that something's an unlawful assembly or giving a dispersal order. We just want them to familiarize themselves with what it is and what constitutes an unlawful assembly. So from that perspective, from an academy recruit, it's very a very basic knowledge that we're passing on. And then we do go into marching and going out and what a skirmish line is and what a column is, and different formations that we go out and we show them on a grease board or on in a presentation, and then go out and march around a scenario village and actually perform those as a group. But from an academy recruit's perspective, a lot of it is just discussing what their role is going to be, what they are going to be doing. But every department's policy is different, so we don't talk about less lethal and when that would happen. We don't get into specifics that a different agency, because they vary so far from one agency to another. Berkeley does things much different than Sonoma County does, but we have recruits from both agencies, so we really they faced a different challenge. But so our what we instruct is very blasé, so to speak, and very general. To basic crowd dynamics and how we respond to crowd control. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Before I ask Alma to ask her question, I just had a follow-up question to what you were stating. So given the example that Jose Landaverde brought up about like a crowd blocking the freeway, let's just assume that you have CHP there, you have Sonoma County Sheriff's Department there, and the city of Santa Rosa. So within our county specifically, does each agency have similar procedures to follow to address that crowd that's blocking the freeway? And who kind of takes the lead? And then if it gets violent, to the point where you do have to start addressing people or something, how does that all take place? And how do you guys all communicate with different agencies in the same location for the same crowd? Just wondering.
I'll address that. So it depends on where it is. So there's jurisdiction throughout the county. Every agency has jurisdiction in Sonoma County. Highway 101 is CHP. There's nobody else that has the authority over Highway 101 other than CHP. Agency assists are requested, and it's up to the agencies that are responding to follow their own policies and understand the department that they're assisting's policies. So if there were a order in the city of Santa Rosa to move people, then the sheriff's office may be asked to be an agency assist in that. Vice versa on the highway for CHP, and out in the county for Santa Rosa if we were to make that request. It completely depends on what agency has the legal authority over that area.
Got it. Thank you. Alma, did you still have a question that you'd like to ask? You're on mute.
That was actually my follow-up question.
Oh.
Was about the agency assist. What policies need to, what policy do you follow?
So we would follow our policy first and foremost. And then if another agency has a specific policy for whatever that circumstance is, whether it's a pursuit, a crowd control, agencies may have a very specific policy that addresses that. They would let our incident command know on arrival what the rules of engagement are for them, for their agency. And then it's discussed as to whether or not all agencies can comply with their own policies and the rules of the agency they're with.
And if I could just clarify, I think Dr. Reyes wants to say something, but if I could just make a clarification, because Lieutenant Cutting said something about not getting into specifics regarding matters that are currently being investigated. And so I just want to clarify for everyone, we got a lot of questions from the public, and we're going to get into those, I think, shortly. A lot of the questions that we got were regarding a report that was published by the Human Rights Commission. And that was addressing a lot of incidents that took place during the summer protests and complaints about excessive violence and excessive force and other related issues. IOLERO didn't receive any complaints about excessive violence or anything related to protest or crowd control from those summer protests about the sheriff's office. All of those were directed at Santa Rosa PD. And my understanding is that the city attorney contracted with an independent contractor to investigate those matters, and that investigation is underway. I've asked Chief Navarro about it multiple times, and the information I've been given is that that report is expected to be completed by the early spring, February, March, somewhere around there, and that the results will be reported out at a city council meeting. So for the members of the community who are here tonight, who want to know the status of those incidents and the way the protesters were treated, it's being investigated by an independent agency. And IOLERO didn't receive any complaints about excessive force or any of those instances about the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. What we did receive were complaints related to how protesters were treated at the jail and in a holding area that was a parking lot, a makeshift parking lot. That's also being investigated by the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, and it will be audited by IOLERO and included in our public reports. So that's the status about the allegations made in the Human Rights Commission report. And then I think, Dr. Reyes, did you want to follow up with something?
Yeah, thank you, Carly. I just wish to add that part of the problem when handling protests, right, is that lack of a uniformity across departments on how to respond, lack of standardized protocols on how to respond. And I also wish to respond to Mr. Landaverde's question earlier about training given to will-be police officers. So for my students, what we try to emphasize is the value of the use of the escalation techniques. I know you've already had that discussed in your previous meetings, as mentioned by Lieutenant Fombi. So the escalation techniques, the escalation approach could be used collectively as a form of response to a protest. If you look at it, protest is a very volatile, emotional situation. And there's been tons of research indicating that just the sight of overtly aggressive police response, the uniforms, the tools, the weaponry displayed tends to incite more emotional response from the participants. And sometimes it leads to a more aggressive, more violent response from the protesters. So as part of the escalation techniques, I think we need to look at from the get-go, how do we try, for the agencies, how do we try to diffuse the situation even before it starts? Like, in some jurisdiction, they consciously avoid deploying crowd control units wearing tactical uniforms. They just simply go there wearing their regular police uniforms without any additional weapons, so that not to incite more, to create that us versus them mentality. So instead of sending the message that try it and see what happens to you, what would be more effective probably would be, we're here to make sure that you're able to express what you wish to say in a safe manner. So I think that will be helpful if we strive to make that a change in the mindset on how we collectively respond to protest.
Dr. Reyes, do you know if is there any data on the success of agencies that go into protests unarmed and attempt to de-escalate and not create an us versus them dynamic?
The most recent one that it came across was published in 2020. There's also a concern from law enforcement that if we adopt de-escalation, it might pose some safety risk to officers, because if the some more aggressive, more violent protesters believes that police won't do anything, they might be encouraged to keep pushing the line. So there was an empirical study that was conducted. It shows promise. They found, I think, 64 studies, but only 3 actually met the rigid standard. So it shows promise, but there is no. It's still ongoing. So it's an ongoing discussion among academics and social researchers.
Thank you.
Although I want to add that in other disciplines, in psychiatry, in nursing, that this has been a practice that has been done in so many years, and it's only recently that it's being formally included in the training of police officers. And I don't even know whether maybe Deputy Hughes could discuss more of this. How big of what chunk of the training in the academy are dedicated for the escalation techniques, or to diffuse the emotion during protest?
Well, what we train is more of a reactive method to the crowd than a proactive. So, and the officer safety and the safety of the public is what our greatest concern is. So we basically talk about reacting to the crowd rather than being proactive, unless we're trying to move a crowd in a certain direction or a certain area. Mostly it has to do with our response is going to be based on the crowd's actions.
Can I jump in here? Okay, so I just wanted to address what Dr. Reyes was talking about. It's a very important topic. One of the panels that I work on for the National Institute of Justice is a special technical committee that's looking at the protective gear that police officers wear. Before I joined this committee, I just assumed that the protective gear that we wear, the helmets and other things, were scientifically tested, and there was some objective standard that manufacturers were held to. And as part of this panel, I found out that that's not true. So they brought practitioners like myself from all over the country, from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and from the UK, together with scientists from the NIJ, to basically establish scientific standards to test the equipment that is currently on the market and make the manufacturers meet these objective standards. Part of that discussion turned to, in a perfect world, we would have protective gear that was scientifically rated, that was discreet, and we could look like regular police officers and we have our regular uniform on, but we still have the protection that we need, because we do understand that, you know, and if you go out to, like I referenced a Code Pink protest or Berkeley High students, and everybody shows up with their helmets on and all their gear, that's just one, sending the wrong message, but you know, two, it's likely to inflame the crowd and seem like an overreaction. But on the other side of that, and we've had this discussion, what is the balance? When we show up to a potentially violent protest and we tell the officers, leave your helmets in the van, go out there with your baseball cap on, and then people start throwing bricks. That is not appropriate. So we have to strike the right balance. And I've been on the ground and made those decisions multiple times. There's times where we said, okay, we're going to go out here with our baseball caps on. We have our helmets on our belt. And literally as soon as we come out of the building, it's a riot. And before we even get into the park where the protest is happening, it's everybody put your helmets on so you don't get knocked out. And then we are taking action from the beginning of the protest. So yes, we should be aware of the appearance of the officers and the message that sends, but we can't send the officers into an event without the proper protective gear.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and ask some of the questions that were submitted from the public. So there were several regarding curfews, and one of them says to discuss the use of curfews and how they are limiting people's rights to peaceful protest and assembly.
I think I could probably answer. I think you're talking about recent Santa Rosa events, which again, there's an investigation into that. The curfews were set not by the sheriff's office, so I don't have any information into how or the rationale behind the curfew itself, other than I know there was one set.
But if there were a situation where there's a curfew set, like for example, now that we have COVID-19 and we have situations where you have the state ordering people to stay at home or something. I'm not saying that it'll lead to a protest necessarily, but let's say something happens during the process when we're supposed to be curfewed. What would be, how would the Sonoma County during a time period when a curfew is set in place?
Now you're asking me a political hotbed, huh? Thank you. Let's take COVID out of it for a second. For a curfew issued regarding protests. Protests are peaceful until they're not peaceful. The sheriff's office, like Dr. Reyes was talking about, our tactical team is invisible until it's needed. When sometimes as well. Action not by a set rule, isn't the problem. An end result for it, for violating a law. But the protests themselves, if they protest, you could begin protesting on our front grass here today, and end in a week, and as long as it's all the other rules that go with it, continue for a week, and we wouldn't stop it.
Thank you. Or is there any research regarding curfews or anything like that, Dr. Reyes, that, no? Okay. Other questions I can ask, but in the meantime, I know joined us, and not to put you on the spotlight, but is there anything that maybe you'd like addressed from our panelists?
my lateness. And thank you, Lorena. I have no questions right now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. There are a lot of questions regarding less lethal use of force, less lethal projectiles. I know a lot of this has already kind of been addressed, but there's a question that asks to discuss the use of less lethal projectiles and what are different alternatives that might be considered. I guess we can also, if you have any information regarding any upcoming policy changes or anything that might be kind of in the works regarding using different weapons or things like that when it comes to crowds, especially when dealing with all of the different situations that we have been facing this past year and overall in the past. Does anyone know of anything?
The governor issued an order shortly before the elections, around middle of October, asking that agencies adopt more strict policies regarding how crowd control measures are done. And I've read through it several times, and to be honest, it falls right in line with what at least Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, and I'm sure Berkeley PD have been doing for years, or at least for a long time. I won't say go so far as to say years, but several years ago, a lot of those things were previously adopted as safe practice and best practice for crowd control. I don't know that that was statewide. I think that's probably why he addressed the issue. But everything that was in his recommendations had already been in policy, at least from the sheriff's office perspective.
That's really good to hear. So in a way, our sheriff's department is proactive in that aspect when comparing to what like the state is recommending. So do any of the council members have any additional questions? If not, I think we can move on to public comment. And we have a hand raised, and if there's anyone else that would like to speak, we'll go ahead and move on from there. It looks like more hands went up. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I think Carlene, and if everyone's okay with it, maybe you can do 2 minutes of public comment. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start my timer. And our first speaker is Della Shea Carmona Benson. So if she could be unmuted, please, and we will let her speak for 2 minutes. And give me 1 second. Let me just set my timer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I feel so disappointed in this whole meeting and so disrespected in this whole meeting. For you guys to act like the protesters were the problems that this summer because we didn't contact the police prior to protesting is a joke. When the police were the ones that were harassing people, the police were the ones who were not peaceful, not the peaceful protesters. Why would we contact the police and tell them when we're going to do what when they're the ones that we fear the most? They're the ones who attack us. They're the ones who are killing us. They're the ones who are harming us. So why would we contact them first? That doesn't make any sense. And for you to bring somebody to Berkeley to come over here and tell us what's going on, you have no idea what's going on in Santa Rosa. First of all, we're less than 2% Black here. Less, you think we're represented here? As we can see right now tonight, even Aliero doesn't represent us. So this whole meeting today was a joke to me, and it's very insulting, very insulting. I'm extremely disappointed with this whole thing, completely. Y'all can have the rest of those seconds.
Thank you. Next up, we have, it just says community member. if you can go ahead and give me 1 second. You have 2 minutes. You can go ahead and proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm extremely disappointed that this panel has only had law enforcement as panelists. It's really disrespectful to the people of Sonoma County who have been a part of peaceful protests and received absolutely no protection from law enforcement when multiple vehicles attempted to run through peaceful protesters this summer. Also, conflating Oakland to Santa Rosa is a gross miscalculation and disgusting at best. Your policy is designed to give you the most legal protection when you inevitably do something messed up to our community. And if you want to do better by your citizens, you should honestly quit your jobs and do something more productive like teaching self-defense classes. The time to talk about what y'all have done to protesters needs to be transparent and public. Own up to your actions and do better. Avoiding accountability will only be a detriment to you and the people you claim to protect and serve. Also, property damage is not violence. Fuck you, Brandon Cutting, I yield my time.
Next.
Lorena, if you want to redirect the public commenters to our design team alliance, I think that would be an appropriate time.
Okay, I will do that. So just to remind everyone, our design team alliance is to be tough on topic, not on people. Respect others. Respect others' perspective. Respect time. Practice active listening. Be open-minded. Speak to others as you would like to be spoken to. Honor freedom of speech and call each other in. So if everyone who has their hands raised could just keep that in mind when you're providing your public comments, and we'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker, to our next resident, Kimmy Barbosa. I'm gonna start your time now.
Hi, my name is Kimmy Barbosa. I'm a resident of Sonoma County. So the CAC is having a discussion with mainly law enforcement about crowd control while still not addressing the issue of human rights violations during the summer protests because it doesn't involve the sheriff. But Spencer here just spent a chunk of time fear-mongering about protesters in Oakland without parameters, and you invited these folks here to have a conversation about protests, but made it convenient enough for them to deflect any conversation that talks about officer abuses during protests, which is a local and national issue. We cannot have the discussion of crowd control in a vacuum. We cannot have this discussion without completely ignoring the human rights violations in this county, like in Santa Rosa, where a Pomo man was injured to the point of needing facial reconstruction surgery. Another human being's anatomy was severely injured to the point of needing a testicle removed, and another human being was shot with a projectile, severely injuring their head, among other serious injuries in police response to largely nonviolent nature on the parts of the protesters here in Santa Rosa. Not to mention the intentional attempts at discrediting protesters by calling them rioters in the local media and essentially calling open season on marchers by police refusal to give consequences to motorists who try to run over youth protesting the streets and pulling out weapons like knives and guns on us. And the cherry on top is you're featuring Deputy Brandon Cutting here on this panel, and he's known for harassing and showing up to the homes of people protesting the death of Andy Lopez. Why are we having this police-led conversation that paints protesters as bad actors instead of looking at the human rights violations of law enforcement and discussing demilitarizing the police? There hasn't even been a discussion about de-escalation tactics. Let's talk about how the youth as young as 11 were arrested after a peaceful march while singing happy birthday to Andy Lopez. Let's talk about the fact that officers are joking about which of the young women they zip-tied they would have sex with here in Santa Rosa. Let's talk about the 150 protesters who were arrested and not given proper PPE and in congested cells during a pandemic. This is a farce. Iolero is supposed to be a safe space from law enforcement so affected people and communities can have their complaints reviewed. But by doing this, having a panel of law enforcement here, you are further dissolving the trust the community has in this office. Mind you, a community who showed up in the masses to support this office with Measure P. Be accountable. No more lip service. I yield my time.
Okay, next up we have Colin Metcalf. Colin, your 2 minutes start now.
Hi, my name is Colin Metcalf. I'm a lifetime resident of Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. I'd like to echo the same sentiments that the rest of the community has said before me. Incredibly disappointing for a number of reasons. I'd first like to start with Spencer Fomby, who came all the way out here or is visiting us on the internet from Berkeley. I was there on May 29th in Oakland as well. And let me tell you what I saw. I walked with a number of other protesters who were mad, I will grant you. And we were all walking, chanting, folks were singing songs, going along peacefully, people were pissed. Understandably, somebody had just been murdered. So we come around the corner to Oakland Police Department, and you know what we see? We see 3 lines deep of riot cops ready to beat the shit out of people. Excuse me for being passionate, but that was terrifying. All right. And yeah, you wonder why people responded violently. Y'all weren't there to help us protest peacefully. Y'all were there to beat people up. And let me tell you, I saw teams of police officers chasing people down in the street, beating them, tackling them to the ground. Peaceful protesters, folks who were just standing there saying whatever they wanted to the cops. Y'all were not there with our best interests in mind. So I'm sorry that you were afraid, but we were afraid too. All right. So talking about who instigates violence here, it's the cops. We're showing up angry because you are in our communities, killing our community members, beating the shit out of them, attacking people with tear gas. In Santa Rosa, people were chased into the backyards of community members. People were chased down alleys, targeted, kettled. You kidding me? You think that? I cannot believe you. And to Tim Hughes, I'm probably running out of time here, talking about what this country was founded on. You know what this country was founded on? Violent revolution.
Thank you, Colin.
Property damage.
Okay, next up we have a phone number, 707-703-0694. Go ahead, your 2 minutes start now. I believe, go ahead.
This is Jim Duffy. I live in Rohnert Park. I'm going to give general comment rather than addressing the presentations tonight, because you're only allowing one opportunity for public comment this evening, which is a shame. You're the only body for public to address sheriff's issues, concerns, and questions. And you should be allowing comment not only on agenda items, but also on items not on the agenda. And the public should have multiple opportunities to address you. And it's a shame that you have chosen to limit public comments since you people took over this body. The minutes for your meetings are not provided to the public and should be, and are not posted on your website. So they should not only be posted on the website, but the draft minutes should be provided to the public before your meetings so that when you're voting to approve them, we know what you're approving. And for the public members who show up all the time, if there's something missing, we should be able to comment and let you know what you missed in these minutes. Your meetings need to go back to being 2-hour meetings, not an hour-and-a-half meeting. By eliminating a half an hour 12 times a year, you have effectively cut out 3 full meetings out of the year. That's just not okay. Going to recent things that have been going on in our county, you may have read in the paper that the Sheriff's Department hired a gentleman, Deputy Bottomley, from the Vallejo Police Department, where he cost the city $750,000 from a civil settlement. We can't do much about Sheriff Bottomley now because he was hired back in 2018. But we do need to look at the hiring practices of the sheriff's office.
Next up, we have Lee. Lee, if you're able to speak, you will be unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, I want to echo what so many people have said tonight. I just want to say, as we have seen all over the country, communities are standing strong in their resolve to finally and completely address police brutality. In neighboring San Francisco, the new DA is holding law enforcement accountable for the first time ever. Here in Sonoma County, there's a landslide in passing Measure P. Community members are clear. It's difficult to listen tonight after reading the human rights violations report, after witnessing a person trying to drive into a crowd, and after witnessing the response that the police gave to that, after watching with my own eyes people hurt by counter protesters It's shocking that this panel is made of people currently involved in investigations about violating the rights of protesters. So as you can see, the community is absolutely not stopping in our demand for change. The communities all over the country are not stopping. It saddens me to hear what was said tonight. It saddens me to have fear mongering. It saddens me to see the protesters be painted in such a light when in fact it was mostly counter protesters and police who were involved in the human rights violation reports activities. I yield my time.
Thank you. So we have 10 hands raised at this time, and after those 10, we will not be taking any more public comment. So at this time, if I could just have the next person we have is Chris. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Spencer, Brandon, and Tim, y'all were speaking in such generalized terms tonight. You're here talking about things and saying a reasonable amount of time to disperse and such, but reasonable is relative, and it feels like you're being intentionally vague so that you can just excuse all of your shitty behaviors. I want to make it clear that rioting and looting is a valid form of protest in a society that values property over human life. The point of a protest is to spark a revolution or a movement. It's supposed to be radical and uncomfortable. If you don't want nonviolence in your community, then put your goddamn weapons down. I'm disappointed in the CAC tonight. Other than Evan, none of you were asking difficult questions. You even congratulated them on doing the least when they said they were up to whatever code Gavin Newsom had put out. Do better, because we're coming for your seats. And also, don't tone police us. You ask for respect, then we want respect from the cops too. And with the utmost disrespect, fuck you, Brandon, I yield my time.
Again, I just want to remind everyone that we have a design team alliance. If we have more comments that are said in that kind of manner, I will go ahead and repeat them if needed, but please keep that in mind when you're providing your public comments. Next up, we have concerned citizen. You can go ahead and start. Can concerned citizen be unmuted, please?
I'm asking them to unmute. There we
go. They're not unmuting, so we will move on to the next person. And if needed, we will come back to concerned citizen. So Charles Borg has his hand up. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the SRPD and the Sheriff's Office have, at every juncture throughout the summer protests, disregarded severe acts of violence against protesters working in support of Black lives. From people ramming protesters with their cars to pulling guns or knives on us, spitting on us, shouting slurs at us, your alleged protective force has either been entirely absent or stood by and watched as protesters in our community have been abused. Sergeant Cutting's comments about looping police in on direct action just don't make sense to us when we look at the whole picture in Sonoma County. Sheriff Essick and the police union vehemently opposed Measure P and sought to get it off the ballot and out of the hands of voters. We have not been given any reason to trust that there will be any action to protect protesters, whether you're on the scene or not. Chief Navarro has also claimed that the absence of police support for protesters has been because of a lack of communication. But when you were present, you have participated in violence too, maiming Native community members with kinetic rounds, kettling the 100 teenagers and arresting them because of an arbitrarily imposed curfew. Speaking of that curfew, it sounds as though the theory of it is that there's nothing people can do except get arrested. Violence seems to be the policy, control above all else. Your Lexapol policy betrays a preference for easy to ignore protest. Preserving peace is code for compliance, which is mirrored in SRPD's compliance then de-escalation policy. Do what we want and then we'll treat you as human. Protecting life unless that life isn't compliant or white. Preventing the destruction of property. Why is property more important than an individual or group's right to free speech or bodily safety? It doesn't make sense to expect protesters to reach out in that context. It doesn't make sense to blame protesters for the violence brought against them. I yield my time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Noah Miska. Go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, thank you. This is to the officers on the panel. If you spent half as much time actually trying to understand why people hate you as you do trying to convince everyone that you're doing a good job, your lives would be a lot easier. I know it's hard to hear, but if you really want to make the communities you ostensibly serve safer, deeply safer, you should resign. Your job is about using violence and the threat of violence to uphold a system of laws that is deeply unjust. And in doing that job, you are exacerbating the root causes of the problems that you think you're solving by being a cop. And I'm suppressing, almost at expressing, I am suppressing a lot of anger to be able to say these things clearly because I really want you to understand them. I know that you do, risk. You risk a lot in doing your job, but you're not accomplishing what you think you're accomplishing. And I don't know what it's going to take for you to understand that, but I am bringing that to you as an honest assessment of the dynamics around law enforcement. And I really hope that you try and understand where people are coming from when they're coming at you with the intensity that you've been seeing tonight. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Michael. Michael, go ahead when you're ready.
Hello. So what I want to know is this a police oversight committee or a protester oversight committee? Because when we have comments about how, protesters would really be more effective if they didn't use violence, when there have been no violent protests here that I've even heard of, I feel like this is a protester oversight committee. We should be looking at the policies of the police here. We should be basing our discussion on what's happening with the sheriff's office and what's happening locally with police. We should not be going through generalizations. Oh, well, sometimes protesters are like this, sometimes they're like this. That is a big waste of time. And that's kind of how I felt like a lot of this meeting was. It was a big waste of time. I was hoping we'd talk about specific policies on crowd control and how they applied to the human rights report on the violations that occurred against protesters, people being shot in the face with chalk rounds, people being sexually harassed by officers. This is a big, big disappointment. And just to throw one more thing in, I'm disappointed that Cutting was allowed to be on this panel because I have reason to believe that Cutting was one of the officers who had previously harassed a protester in support of Andy Lopez. And that's why he's getting so much negative comments on this, because he shouldn't be on this panel. This is not a safe space for the community when we allow people on the panel who specifically have harmed this community. So anyway, I'm gonna yield my time. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dawn Amaral. Go ahead, Dawn, when you're ready. I believe you have to, go ahead.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I've been in this, my family's been here in Sebastopol for quite some time, it's almost 100 years. And one thing I'd like to address, not only with the individuals here that are responding, I appreciate everything you guys have done. Iolera is a very important connection. Without this, so we would not be able to express ourselves and be able to have the feedback. And the viewers, you have to understand that we're all human and it takes two to tango. And if we're in a situation where you're backed up against a wall, whether it's you or an officer, we're all human. And we all react in a way of, rather than pointing fingers, we all need to work together on this. This is new to us, Iolera. It's something that has just been established that we're coming to grips with because of this new landscape that we have around us. So with that in mind, I would just like to say that please try not to be so judgmental to any of our panel individuals here today, because they're doing this for us. They're outreaching to get our input to see. So please hold the derogatory comments as far as everybody here. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Next up, we have Cedar Haney. Good.
Hear me?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, that's actually my son's name. This is his school Zoom. But yeah, I'm a mom, Laurel Burr, resident of Petaluma. Thank you for your thorough review of the public and/or written comments received tonight. I hope that there's a lot more time for this in the future. And yeah, just wanting to address something that Sergeant McGreevy of the Petaluma Police Department said in assent to the Black woman featured in the video documenting the very disturbing, disgusting treatment by police of a Black man last night who was clearly in need of mental health support, not law enforcement, especially not in force like it was last night. It was an infuriating display of police escalation, ignorance, and pride, power, privilege, white blindness. When confronted with the truth stated by the Black woman in the video, she said, "You know what will solve a lot of these things? You guys need more Black officers." McGreevy quickly responded, "I agree with you. I agree with you." So based off of this obvious need, what is the PPD and Sonoma County Police Force going to do in order to get more BIPOC/Black officers of varying genders and gender identities in 2021, starting now, starting yesterday? I'm curious to know if there's going to be a freeze or stop to the hiring of white and male officers until representation is equal, not just proportionate to the population. By both standards, the current representation for diversity within Sonoma County's police force falls woefully short. And though it would be an improvement, basing police representation off the population's proportions cannot be the bar that we set, because the local general population is so lacking in diversity based off of the genocide of First Peoples and the continual outrageous systemic, structural, interpersonal, and individual racism and gentrification since. We need equal representation within the police force, and we need it yesterday. So what is your plan of action to actualize this in 2021? And lastly, stop projecting. Your violence, your misconduct are the primary problem here. We are rising up in response to your ineptitude, and it's time to realize that the people on the side.
Next up, we have 707-480-5768. Go ahead when you're ready. I believe you have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I am a lifetime resident of Santa Rosa. And yeah, I just want to echo what some of the other people are saying. I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of this meeting was. It kind of felt like it was meant to sort of bridge the gap or build a relationship between the public and law enforcement. But I don't know if that was accomplished this evening. It kind of felt like things were talked so generally, and I understand that things can't be spoken about because there's an ongoing investigation, but we really didn't get a deep dive into issues of excessive force, the militarization of law enforcement, and ways the county plans to ensure the safety of all the citizens, particularly when they are protesting. And I felt like we got just a very general overview of what law enforcement does in crowd control. We didn't get any information on what sort of de-escalation tactics are used. We just got when, you know, crowds get violent, and then we got very like general descriptions of what that meant, and quotes like, "An assembly is peaceful as long as it's peaceful," which doesn't really give us any information. So I had high hopes for this meeting, and I felt like we were kind of let down. Difficult questions were not asked, and we really didn't get any new information. So I hope that in the future, we do a deeper dive and we do talk about the important issues specifically excessive force, because this is why we're here. This is why we have this oversight, and this is why there have been so many protests. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Gary Evans. Gary, when you're ready.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So first, I'd like to completely echo the last caller. This meeting is very appreciated to bring you folks to the public and vice versa. But this really needs to be a whole lot more specific, more details in terms of what nuanced things are in place to deal with protests, not simply a kind of a binary view, which is a disease of our society right now, binary views, polarizations and so forth, of saying that, for example, a protest is peaceful or it's not, or we know when a protest is no longer peaceful, it isn't. It really, things aren't that binary in life. And what's going on right here, I'm hearing a lot of angry people and a lot of very vague kind of comments from the committee. And basically that's a sense of binary as well. What you need to do is kind of dig in, as the last caller said eloquently, and give us the details of how you're going to address this, how you're going to make society, your side of society, better for yourselves and us, right? I've done it myself. I've referred to myself as a binary object relative to you, and I don't mean to do that. We're all in the same boat. And I think we all deserve that. We all deserve to see that. That's basically my rather vague comment. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, we had announced we would not take any more public comment. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight and for all of the information that you shared. I personally thought it was very valuable. I know that the community wanted to hear more specifics, but the topic is complicated and there are a lot of things going on. So it's hard for everyone, but I think we got a lot of really valuable knowledge from everyone. And I really thank you for the opportunity and everything that you shared. Evan, do you have anything to share?
No, I thank all of our panelists for coming here and discussing this with us. Of course, to our members of our community, understand that this is a continuing discussion. This is not the only discussion that we intend to have as a CAC regarding crowd control and protests. But the information provided by our panelists today was very important for us to get. And I thank all of our panelists for participating. I'm sorry I haven't been able to see you due to my technical difficulties today, but I do very much appreciate you participating and speaking with our community today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being with us. It was a valuable conversation. These are difficult conversations to have. And I'm grateful that we had the panelists here with us tonight. It's no wonder that some committees similar to the CAC, including the prior CAC, had difficulty getting panel members like the ones we have here tonight because of the violent communication. So we've got this issue of violence on the streets with protests. We've got this issue of excessive force. And we also have this issue of violent communication. And I think it's important to point that out, because the fact of the matter is, if you're yelling at people and cussing at people, people don't want to talk to you. And that's something that's been an ongoing issue with the CAC. It's something that we're trying to address in order to have productive, effective meetings. And I think this current CAC is doing an excellent job of that. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our CAC members who are here to have respectful, inclusive, and effective conversations. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Our next meeting will be January 4th, and we'll be publishing the agenda online. So make sure that you get that information. Otherwise, thank you everyone for being here and have a great night.